Well, hello everyone.
Hi,
And
hi.
hey, and welcome to More People, More Problems with your host, me, Chels, and
Me, Brett. I was like, "Are you gonna say it? Am I saying
Good. She didn't know I was going to throw it to
We
her.
didn't rehearse that one because it was
I
so
just
streamlined.
I just go with whatever feels right in the moment, and that
Yeah,
just
is that what you
felt
do?
right to me. And it feels right to see your face going, "Oh my god! Like, is she like sending it to me? Is she saying
You just
it?"
wanna
And
fuck with me.
she panics. She panics a little bit. So, yes, welcome back to the podcast. So, we're here today doing another recording. It's going to be an interesting topic today that my girl Britt is going to lead for us into what hopefully isn't too difficult of a conversation. But, who knows? No pun intended, obviously. But before we jump into it, I think that we put in a little plug on our last episode about liking, sharing, subscribing. But I think even more than that, I think as Britt mentioned, tell us like if you agree with what we're saying. Do you have any contrary views? Are we missing something? Do you
Yeah.
have any experiences of having been the person leading a tough conversation or as the recipient of a very difficult conversation, in the workplace or I guess even like at home? I have a lot of those at home too, funny enough. And how did it go for you? And where did it go wrong? Or how did it go right? So, anywho, I'm going to move on from that. I'm going to toss over to Britt. Want to hear what you have to say about
Yeah.
having those tough conversations at work.
Yeah, and so if you haven't got it by now, Chelsea obviously said a few hints. We're gonna be talking about difficult conversations. And why? Because they're so fucking difficult. No one wants to do them. It's hard. So let's get into the nitty gritty. And I want to actually kick it off with a little story. So I remember one really hard conversation I had to have. I was actually letting someone go. And I just, I knew it was going to be hard because of what I knew about the person that I was letting go. I knew that even though I felt there was a lot of preparation, they might seem surprised by it. There was a little bit of lack of awareness on where we were at, regardless of how many conversations I had given before. And I mean, let's face it, it's really shitty to have to fire anyone. And it's one of the hardest conversations to tell someone they've essentially been rejected from the company and from a relationship with me. And so I did a bunch of homework. I prepared. I remember I role played with my talent BP, which is the business partner. I, did everything under the sun to ensure that I was approaching this conversation in the most caring way and the most respectful way. And I was nervous. I showed up though, and I thought in my head I was doing it. I was like, I'm nailing this. I'm doing all the things I wanted to. And shocker, it did not end how I thought it was gonna end. It kinda blew up in my face. And so afterwards, I was talking to my coach and saying, I really thought I checked all the boxes. I did all the things I was supposed to do. Like, how did it end up at this really negative place? Like, I obviously failed. And she stopped me and she was like, "Did you fail though?" And I'm like, "Well, I wanted it to go smoothly." And she's like, "What did you really want?" And I was like, "I wanted them to accept that I was firing them and say, 'Thank you, Brittany, for showing up with so much care and, time and effort and examples of why." And she's like, "Was that ever gonna happen?" And I'm like, "You're right, no." But then she reminded me of a time, one of my earlier conversations where I was the recipient of really critical, hard stuff. It was a difficult conversation and how I felt. And no matter what the other person was saying, no matter how they took the most care for it, I had a defensive response. I was emotional. I was angry. I was aggravated. I was fearful that maybe I would get fired. You go into that high stress, which then relates to the fight or flight response, and you kind of stop listening. And what I realized in this discussion with my coach was there is a few different perspectives that you need to take when thinking about a difficult conversation. There is the person who is instigating and delivering the difficult conversation. There is the recipient of the difficult conversation who, let's be honest, usually isn't as prepared as the person delivering it,
Well, no, of course not. That's why
right?
they're shocked and upset and responding in anger. They haven't had days to think about
And
it.
prepare.
Yeah,
And to have the perfect sayings.
right.
But the third lens is the organization. It's your culture. It's and by the way, whether we talk about this in the workforce or at home, it can be the culture of your marriage. It can be the culture of your family and how things get brought up when they're difficult. Do they get swept under the rug? Do they get brought up right away in a timely manner? Do they get brought up with so much fluff that you actually lose the hard stuff, like we talked about, at different times, of shit sandwich? Um, Radical candor. We talked about a lot of this, but like really, how do we dive into those three perspectives? And specifically today, we're going to talk about like what are things we can do to make it to really set you up in the best way, knowing that the outcome isn't always going to be, oh, it was great and we got what we wanted. It might actually just be a dot, dot, dot till the next conversation. So, yeah, that was my hard learning back in the day. But I thought that leads well into the different perspectives. What do you think, Chelsea?
Well, I think it's really interesting because you can be as prepared, you can hit off all the little notes that you had put down, put out together. You can be as clear as possible, and it still could blow up in your face because you cannot control how the other person is going to react to that information. So, yes, you may have done all the right things in the moment, and maybe you didn't.
Yeah, that's
Maybe
also a very
one way that
common.
you reacted changed a little bit of your course as well, or maybe it didn't. But the thing is that you can't. We're all humans, right? So at the end of the day, they're going to have a reaction, and exactly just what we said. They haven't had all the time in the world to think about it. And also, if they're not individuals who are reflecting too much, um, it's possible that they're unawares of some of the things, whether that's their fault or others' fault. Ideally, it's not anyone else's fault because they haven't told them. But if they've had conversations with others similarly in the
Yeah.
past about all these issues, for maybe the reasons why they're being fired, they're clearly not someone who's reflected too much on their behavior and how that's impacted the organization. And so this then comes as a shock to them, which is in turn to most people is a shock to them because they're going, how do you not know this? Like,
Yeah,
how
I
did you
know.
not know
It's
we were
just a
getting here?
circle.
Yeah, it's
And
vicious.
I think even with that, like, let's start from the lens of the organization or the family culture, but really, like, obviously, an org isn't a family, but that like meta culture. And then let's go down to the instigator, which I think in a lot of cases is a lead, or maybe in a relationship, it could be either, and then the receiver. Because I think what we can build for the potential of success starts with those layers.
Sure.
It's as an individual, you do need to, like you said, be ready for hard conversations. You need to be self-aware, but I think that unless you have the first two, even if you're the most self-aware, it blows up because you're not being done right. So let's talk about the org in this case. But I think honestly, it can be a family, it could be a marriage, it could be anything. And I think, in my opinion, the basis of it needs to be that conversations, whether easy, difficult, or somewhere in the middle, is the most critical skill set of any organization. Being able to talk about things, being able to reflect on things, hard or not, is critical. And actually, when you look at that within a marriage, I'm pretty sure, I don't know the exact stat, but I remember when I was researching this and talking to my husband about it, having difficult conversations, if you're able to in a marriage, is the leading indicator of long-term happy marriages. If you're able to have those hard conversations in a timely manner and actually resolve and move through, sometimes not resolve, but even have it, make it aware within the group, you are going to have a longer, healthier relationship. So when you look at that, then you think, well, how could that not be in the office setting then? That's such a critical flow between two humans or one to many that you need to be able to build that muscle. And so I think what you really need to do first off is build the culture in which hard conversations happen and they're actually appreciated and seeked to have rather than diminished or pushed away or avoided. I don't know if you've heard, Chelsea, of is it Anderson Horowitz, who is was a partner at an investment, him and his brother, but they have a culture of really, I think they call it high frequency feedback. And it talks about a lot of, our culture and our specific policies internally and what we've built is that we realize difficult conversations is so critical. And so we believe that they're, unnatural, uncomfortable, but we need to have them. And so we are going to encourage people to do it at a scale and actually create feedback or positive loops of like, this is great, to encourage it so often, whether it's small and big, and show it from the top, lead by example so that everyone knows that this isn't just subjective to them, like they're shit or they're great. It really is something we expect from everyone and it's approved of. It's looked at as greatness. And they have almost that radical candor aspect of culture, which is, culture or sorry, feedback is hard, but we can do it in a way that is direct without being mean. It's compassionate, but it's going to be right to the point. And so I think that's one example of a culture that's really just taken in the fact that feedback and conversation is really critical. But I've also seen other organizations that do the complete opposite. And that's just their environment. And the ripple effect is direct, difficult conversations occurring all the time and avoidance and never happening and, just burying the lead all the time. I'm curious what the government's like.
I mean, it's hard because when you look at these big organizations as well, it has to start from the top, right from the top, and it has to permeate all
Yeah.
the way to your lowest level of management leading people. It has to be consistent. Because
Yeah.
if it's not consistent, if you've got some doing it this way and some doing it that way, that's going to actually shred or deteriorate some of that culture that's attempting to like get momentum for where people actually want to start getting comfortable with it. They can't because they don't know if it's always going to be the case, if
Yeah.
manager is going to be constantly providing feedback, good, bad, the ugly, the whole thing, or if it's going to be avoidance, or if it's only going to be sometimes but not all times, only the big things, not the little things. So consistency really is key. And I mean, it's hard to say in the government on what it is, but like I'll always go back to it's the leaders at the top who are telling you, who are actually living it and breathing it and
Yeah.
saying that we need to have these difficult conversations regardless of the level. We don't push things under the rug. We talk about them. Um, and I think it's easy, though, sometimes to forget about the good as well. So we get used to having feedback loops for when you're doing something bad, and then sometimes forget about having those feedback loops when something is really great. And I'm not saying that this is or isn't the case in the government or where I work necessarily, but I think it's all in that circle, right? So it's
Well, and I think what it is, in my opinion, is sure, it's great to say, hey, we have difficult conversations and we're going to do it on a company level. Like that's part of our culture. Anderson Horowitz, that is their DNA of their culture. They're like, we have direct, timely, consistent. We're always going to go in, whether it's good, bad, but even the difficult ones, we're doing it often. And they lead by example. And you can do that by, whether you're doing, let's say you're doing an all hands, whether that's for a department or whole company. Within that, if you're truly believing and living this, there's probably going to be a moment where, let's say, where you're sitting and I say something and you're like, well, actually, Brittany, I didn't like how you did that. And here's why. And you give me some feedback or some thoughts that to others they'd be like, "Oh, that was really hard. Like she just offended her." Well, no, she gave me feedback and this is how she did it in a very constructive way and this is how it's set up and then they're going to watch how I respond. And if I'm like, "Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that." And if I don't go to my emotion-based anger and disappointment and defensive mechanism because it's challenging the view I have of myself because I'm unaware, well, like people are going to read that and see it and go, oh, that was great for growth. I want to mimic that. I want to do it too. But the thing people don't realize is you need high trust underlying those difficult conversations or else they can't happen. And so I think one of the things that companies fail at is they talk about, okay, we're going to have the hard conversations and we want to do it fast because it's important for growth, success, creativity. But they don't talk about the relationship and the trust you need underneath it to be able to enable that. Because if I didn't know you and you watched me do the dishes. I'm using such a silly example, but you watched me do the dishes. You just came to my house and then you started saying, I think you did it wrong. You're not going to clean them and da 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 da. And here's why. I'd be like, you could go fuck right off. Like, you don't know this. You don't know how I like to do it. Whereas if Chelsea, my best friend, who I know loves me and cares for me, and we have this track record and experience and trust, said, hey, Brett, like you're doing this wrong and here's why. I'm so much more open to listen because I know that you have my best interest at heart. I know all these things. And so I think trust is actually what enables these really difficult conversations to be able to had in an organization and a culture.
Absolutely. That trust, that circle of safety that we talk about within an organization. When you don't have that circle of safety, that trust, that high level of trust, especially in your leadership or all through levels of an organization, um, A, you're not going to respond well to those conversations. B, you start eating each other alive because it's all competition from within as well. And it just like doesn't turn out well. So I think that your main point about having that high trust has to be paramount when you go into something. And I think the dishes example is a really good example,
Well,
even
and
though
it's funny because even when you said that, I'm like distilling it even further. I think it's specifically you need to have trust that the person who instigates the difficult conversation with you or in the culture that they a want the they have your best interests at heart and they have the best company's interest at heart. And whether let's say that's the family, then they have the family's best interest at heart and they have yours to succeed. It might mean that still like a really difficult one is to fire someone. That could still be those 2 things being considered because ultimately when someone isn't performing and they're not thriving and they don't have a chance of thriving ever and growing in their career, the best thing you can do for that individual is to actually have a real conversation with them and say, this isn't going to work long term. Let's figure out a plan to get you out. Like today's going to be the last day because of this, but it's actually because for the success of the company and for their future, it's not going to work. And so someone needs to lead that hard conversation. And then it's like, okay, now what is the skill set to be able to do that?
so you just answered my question because I was going to ask you. You said in the best interest of the organization and the person, the
Yeah.
receiver. But I'm assuming that organization is paramount here, is
Yeah.
the top. So we're going in the best interest of the organization. Obviously, we want productive people. We want happy. We want, people who are going to have impact and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it would be very hard for a recipient who's being fired on that day to go, oh, yes, you're doing this for me. Thank you so much, Brittany, for being so kind and
Totally
looking
agree.
out for me. I've just lost my income. I've just lost my, one of the top needs on, Maslow's hierarchy. Like, what am I going to do now? But you're saying this is good for me. Thanks so much. Like,
Well, and I don't think you say, and this is getting into I don't think you say, I'm firing you because I'm thinking the best of you. But I
yeah.
do think there is a lens of it. But to your point, I think most importantly, it's if you're in an organization, you need to think about what it means to be the best organization. And is if this, then it's the individual. And I honestly would say, unless you are an asshole leader or political, when you let someone go, it is because you think that they are no longer going to be able to do their job at this company and thrive and grow. There are layoffs that suck
Yeah.
and
What
that
about,
has nothing. So like
yeah.
I am totally agreeing to that and that probably isn't the best and that's why it is a stack rank of if organization first, you get paid to be a part of it, so that is it first. But I think in many cases, you do actually consider the individual as well.
Mhm.
And that comes back to the trust, though, of, you know, actually taking the time to know the audience of who you're having a difficult conversation with. And so, actually, on that point, we talked about the environment then, like trust, encouraging it. It needs to be a piece. People need to witness it, they need to see it.
Mhm.
It's very similar to growing up in your family. If you've never seen your parents have a hard conversation, you're not going to jump in then to give a difficult conversation to go with one of them or with your siblings. You're going
Okay.
to avoid it because you've never seen it. You don't know what to mimic. You don't know the potential benefits of it because you've never seen it flow through. So I think, being a role model and really setting up whether it's, assertions or mental models around it is really critical and really explaining the aspect of it. But then we talk about the person instigating the difficult conversation.
Okay. So maybe the manager, the leader, the
Yeah. I mean, it can be a peer too, let's be honest. It could be 2 best friends that you really don't like something your best friend has done, and you know you have to have a conversation. And what makes it difficult, let's just be really blunt here, is what makes it difficult is when you know that it's gonna rub up against the person's receiving it mental view of themselves. It's going to be something that you are predicting that they might not wanna hear, and that would be, I'd say, 90% of the time. The other 10% is probably you have had a bad experience before and you are bringing forward an experience or a memory that's triggering that you're like, oh, I once told this friend or this coworker that I didn't like it and they flipped out on me. So now I've like been teaching myself, don't go there. So I think like be aware of why you're finding it difficult first and foremost. I think the second thing is like, I think there's a stat or a saying that the outcome of difficult conversations is less about what you say in the conversation and it's more about how you prepare for the conversation. So that would be my second point. I think intentionality and actually doing your homework and care and figuring out who the audience is, what you think they will come to the table with, kind of wrapping your head around all of that and putting your intention and time and effort into it is so critical. When I think about my when like as a receiver, the hardest conversations I've had where I've received it the best are the ones when the lead or the person giving it to me showed up with so much care and like research. Like, here's my thought, but here's some examples of where I saw it come through. Here's the facts. And it's like they've done so much to prepare for this conversation that then I can start to wrap my head around it, that they care enough to actually have this and like do their homework for it. Whereas the worst times I've received it is where someone shows up and they're like, by the way, you sucked at this. And I'm like, well, why? And they're like, well, I witnessed it at this meeting and that's it.
yeah,
There's no,
you want the details, you want the factual bits. You don't want just some random anecdotal information, random opinions. So putting that into an example for folks, if you're approaching an employee about consistent lateness every day, the type of thing that you'll want to go in with is, there've been 3 out of 5 times this week where you've been 20 minutes late each day, and the impact of that is that another employee has to pick up that work at that time, and then they are late in attending a certain meeting at a time afterwards, so whatever. But I think the factual bits in terms of saying that rather than so you're always late, and that's really starting to bother everyone on the team. Like, be legit.
yeah. And you know what? I'm going to pivot a bit because I think the best way to go through the two different perspectives of person delivering and person receiving is to use a very specific example. So I'm going to make this up. It's not true. It hasn't happened in this way, but I do think it will be helpful. So let's use the example, excuse me, of you have a player that's been amazing, so critical in your org. They've only really need encouragement, direction, and growth. But all of a sudden, the past month, they're showing up late. They're not focused. They are not performing. Let's say the past 2 months, and you have to have a really hard conversation because everyone else has noticed, and you need to get them either back on to where they were, or else have a hard conversation about them not being part of the organization anymore. And so I think what we talked about so far is like prepare. You know this individual. Let's say you know that they've been an A player and it's been 2 months. Do you know anything that's happening in their life that would have caused this? Like think through it. Then to your point, it's like, what are the facts? What are specific moments that you've witnessed that you know of that have happened? And what is the evidence around it that results in a bad outcome? So instead of being like, well, they're late all the time, in all honesty, like who cares if they're late? Like, how does that tie to a bad negative effect on the organization or team? Well, because you were late 3 times out of the last month, you've missed our team meeting. You weren't able to contribute your great knowledge. And so we've lacked that input and we haven't been able to make as strategic of decisions as a result. It's like tying it full circle with facts. So it's not like, well, I want you there and you've been late and that's really hurt my feelings.
Mhm.
That's a big old no no. That's emotional, that's subjective, and that's like putting guilt on them rather than facts and tying it to the end result of what you have.
And can I jump in for a
Yeah,
quick
go
check
ahead.
on that too, which I think is really important in those conversations? You're not using terms like, I feel like you're really getting lazy here nowadays. Like you're really not, you're barely coming in. I think one of the phrases that I heard someone say the other day was do surgery, don't stab. So like really being particular and prepared with your words in
Yeah.
terms of like, and you said focus on the facts. You're not putting personas or, various characteristics on that person. You're just giving them the information.
When I think about some of the really bad conversations I've had, it's like my lead or someone giving me a difficult conversation has whipped up this whole story in their head of why I've done something and they've solved it for me. And I'm like, you're so off. Like, A, you're right. I did fuck up there. And that's good feedback, but it's nothing else that is accurate. Like, don't tie it to what you think I'm going through. You might want to be aware of that as a lead so that you have a conversation ready to have so that you can project potential routes it's going to go and practice that so that you are able to have a good conversation. But that's why you have to stick to facts and evidence and outcome on the organization. I
Yeah,
think
you
the other
can
thing,
piss someone off too by doing that.
yeah. And it's also not debatable. Like the worst thing you can do when getting into a difficult conversation is get into a perspective where it's like, well, I disagree. Like we have two different views and we're both right. It's like, no, this isn't debatable. It's actually like, this is a fact. This is a result. This is the outcome on the org. So, like, why that's happening and how we can improve that, let's discuss and let's fix that. And I'm here to support. But the other things aren't debatable. They're not subjective. It's objective on the company. The other thing I would say is just like a timely conversation. I think that the closer you can wrap in a feedback loop to the actual incident or moment of something, the better. Because the interesting thing about humans is we rewrite our memories. It's always a little different when we're looking in the rearview mirror. And people also don't want to mess up. I would say I believe that most humans want to perform, do well, etc. And so let's say I've had a bad day, I'm not performing, I missed a bunch of meetings and I didn't complete a massive project I was supposed to. A week later, that's still fresh in my mind. 2 months later, I've now made up a reason why I wasn't able to do it that makes me feel good because it's no longer clashing with my self-view. And so if you wait 3 months, I might have forgotten about it. I might actually have a very different recollection of it, and I might challenge you on it. Whereas if it's in that following week, it's fresh. We have the same facts. We can go through it. Not to mention you're in a timely manner, you're able to actually solve and move forward, but I think it's really important that you do timely manner.
Well, and that's why they say performance talent discussions need to be happening all year round. Like,
Yeah,
no, it's not just like at the middle of the year or at the end of the year. It's like, boom, here's all this information, and you were
yeah,
horrible. For both parties, it's best that you address sooner rather than later. And any opportunity to have a one on one discussion, if you have weekly or bi-weekly bilateral meetings, is an opportunity to provide feedback, good, bad, critical, whatever the case may be. You don't want to let that stagnate. And like you said, you're creating a narrative where it might not actually have been as bad as
yeah,
what it was, and you haven't had the chance to rectify that.
totally. I think the other 2 things is, consistency, and maybe there's actually one, but consistency of how you approach things. So if you're really timely one time, you should try and always be timely. And if you're not, know that you are out of sync. And so they're not going to expect it in that way. But also consistent in your language. And I think these both go towards, once again, the culture, the environment. I think it's really important in your environment to talk and label things in the appropriate way. So when you're talking about impact, you're always talking about impact in similar ways. What does high impact mean? What does low impact mean? I think there still needs to be subjectivity around that because we're humans and we're not black and white. There's a lot of gray space there. But the more clear you can be about what high impact looks like, the better you're enabling your leads to have conversations when someone isn't there. And it's facts, it's then consistent language, it's a consistent approach to it. And once again, it doesn't feel like, oh my God, this is an attack on Brittany. it's like, actually, I can understand that. We always talk about it in this way, and I'm clearly not doing that. And so that consistency is so critical. And actually, what we're talking about there is the trust. The consistency builds the trust to then be able to have it, but it really solves for both.
Amazing.
Yeah. Um, the only other, I guess, thing that I would say as the person instigating, so you're clear, you've prepped yourself, write notes, like do your homework and actually bullet out, like, here's the things I want to say, here's examples. And I actually think many times it's better to role play and actually talk it out loud with someone before going in. All the times I have either witnessed or else myself not, where I'm like, I've got this, I can have it, and I've thought about it in my head. You get into a real conversation, and all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, like I didn't think about that, or I haven't actually said it out loud at all.
All the
This feels
different
so weird.
angles. Yeah.
Yeah.
How does it sound?
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
So I think those are really, really critical. And then when you think about it, it's like just know that whether it's about someone's I guess I was gonna say all these funny things, but, like, funny and not, like, large scale restructuring, letting someone go, downsizing, going through a riff, constructive criticism for someone junior not performing. But I also think there's other things where you just know people are gonna be triggered because it's not gonna be what they wanna hear. I think those are hard conversations. Start small and practice them in the right way with all these things. And I swear you will get stronger at them. And just know it's so uncomfortable and so abnormal. So you're not going to be good at it when you start. As a leader, it's the most important thing I think you can be good at. But I also think it's the most obscene thing to learn. Like it's so hard. And generally speaking, you're going to learn more from fucking up than you are from like landing it and doing it perfect in the beginning.
Yeah, it's essentially learning how to go and hurt someone's feelings and cause them to
Yeah.
cry,
Right?
but like in a way that makes you not look like an asshole.
And maybe actually that's another point to the person instigating. Once again, you can't control the outcome. I think you need to be curious and you need to actively listen and give space for the conversation. Know that you do not have all, like, as much research and preparation you do. You don't have access to every piece of info. So you're going to learn new things. Be okay with leaving at, okay, you know what? I got more information right here. Let me come back. Or else nothing new has come up and I'm still asserting this way. But be curious, actively listen to the other person, give space for that. And sometimes there's going to be emotions like very anger, like crying. I think
Do you apologize to them after if they've cried, or is
no,
it more of I'm so sorry that this news is so
I wouldn't
disappointing?
even say sorry because that looks like you're done something wrong. And I don't think difficult to, I mean, if you fucked up the conversations, apologize. But I actually think what I would say, if, like, you started crying and I was having a conversation about your performance, I'd say, "I can completely understand that this is really hard to hear, that you have a lot of emotions going on, that you're absorbing this at a slow state. What I want you to do is take some time to process and come back to me, and we're gonna talk again, because why I'm doing this is I believe you can be better. I want you to be here. I want you to thrive, but right now you're not, and it's my responsibility to give you the hard feedback when you're not, because I know that will enable you to be better. But once again, I understand it's hard, so take some time. But I
Look
wouldn't
at that,
apologize.
folks. That was like a Academy Award winning difficult conversation. She just told me, "You're shit, but I care for you still."
Well, I mean, I honestly think it's the biggest testament of showing someone you do care is having hard conversations. The people I don't care about, guess what? I'm not doing it. I'm just firing you. Like that's still hard, but I'm not putting the same effort and time. Like if I think about relationships, if I have a fringe friend and they do something to piss me off, you think I'm going to actually take the time to sit them down and do my like prep and do all these things, have a hard conversation? No, they're just out of the Rolodex. Whereas like someone I really care about, I am really putting the time and effort
You're
in because
investing.
yeah,
Okay,
and you have trust.
amazing. So
Okay,
you
last lens,
feel,
yeah.
yeah, you have a perspective of the receiver. I'm interested to hear about this.
Well, I guess what do you think about the receiver just to start? Because I think you have opinions about it. What are you thinking about that?
Well, I mean, I guess I mean, I'll take it from the lens of you don't know this conversation is about to happen, or you're oblivious,
Yeah.
which is also possible too. So your leader approaches you talking about a performance issue or a tardiness issue, whatever the case may be. I think that as a receiver, I would be trying to look at it, and this is really hard, right? Because, like we said, guys, immediately when you start to be aware that you're having one of those conversations, like you feel like you're either going to get in trouble or you're about to be given some bad news, your cortisol is spiking. Your emotions are right in your center, in your amygdala. So you're being unreasonable, you're being illogical, you're panicking, you're
Yep.
in fight or flight. And we've talked about this before in terms of stress, is that it's really important for you to take that, center it, and bring it to your prefrontal cortex where you're actually going, okay, Brittany's just given me some really hard feedback. And, at the moment, I don't necessarily fully agree with this, but I need to sit and think about it. And I need to kind of take a little bit of a hold of my reaction to this so as not to sour this entire opportunity for me to listen, learn, grow, and potentially come back to it later with more of a clear head and some more information I can share with my lead. That is way easier said than done. And it takes a lot of time training your brain to go
Yeah.
from panic mode and from stress mode and from reactionary to, okay, I'm bringing it to the front here. I'm thinking, I'm absorbing. Maybe I'm not capable of making a logical or providing logical reasoning and responses right now, but I could be later. So I'm taking that and maybe coming back to it. That's maybe
I
where
think
I would go.
I think so what you're talking about right there is self-awareness. And I think that is critical to anything. Like it's like that's probably going to be like our new slogan of this podcast is
Self-awareness.
become more self-aware of both how you are as a human but also natural cognitive biases that come online for humans, and then
Mhm,
you understand why we react in a certain way. And so what I want to talk about is like what should you be aware of? The first thing is that when someone approaches you with a difficult conversation, like you just said, you're not prepared for it. You haven't thought about it.
no,
Maybe you are a little prepared for it and you know it's coming. It's still like you're not at that same level of the person instigating the conversation. And so, what happens, I think, first and foremost, is that we have very like defensive responses. And that's our brain and our body's natural way of, or a natural instinct rather, of like self preservation.
mhm,
Um, we when we hear something like I just said that clashes with our view of ourselves, it manifests things such as denial, deflection, justifications, because what we're trying to do is like, I've just perceived a threat. You've told me something I don't want to hear. I don't believe it. It could be, and generally it is tied to self esteem,
mhm,
identity.
yeah,
And so what we do then is like, no, this isn't happening. I don't believe it. Let me justify why it isn't, which usually then leads to emotional responses. So that's what you're talking about. It's like goes to the limbic system, and it's responsible for emotions such as like sadness, anger, fear. And so that's naturally going to happen. I don't want people to be like, well, I'm just going to not do it now. I know about it. So if someone comes to tell me they hate my outfit and this is why, I know that I might get defensive and have emotions, so I'm gonna just stop. It's like, no. Actually, what you need to do is be aware of it, let it flow through. If you come to tell me that you're unhappy about something, some decisions I've made in our relationship, I need to actually be like, okay, I realize Chelsea just said something that triggers my view of myself as a person. It's lining or it's clashing with how I thought I was a best friend. And so I don't like it. I really don't like it. And now I'm angry. And I'm a little pissed off, and probably more vulnerably, I'm a little scared that this is going to end our friendship. And I will not let that happen. And so, because of that, I'm going to do these things. No, what I'm actually going to do is check myself, let myself feel that, and now try and it's kind of like meditation, like reframe it to be like, okay, Chelsea, I'm having a strong reaction right now. Can we just take a minute? I'm ready to listen, but like really, you're threatening a lot of things about myself. So like take a minute. then okay, I'm ready to hear, but like, can you be really soft with it? Can you just like tell me in a nice way, here's what I can handle? Or else maybe it's like, okay, I heard your feedback to start. I need to process. Can we come back to this tomorrow? I can't hear anything. I've shut down. Nothing else is coming in. That won't, by the way, sadly, you don't have control always. And so that might not always be the case, but you can try for these things. The other thing I would be self aware of as an individual is you are going to have experiences where someone says something and it triggers emotions or memories from childhood, from different points of life, and you're going to have an outlandish, like a bigger response to it than maybe we should. For example, if someone came to me, I'm just going to be really honest here, started talking to me about my weight, you better believe I would be like, "Fuck you, asshole," because I've struggled with my weight growing up. I've always been really insecure about it, and so it's a trigger for me, and it might actually be, my husband coming to me and being like, "I noticed that you don't feel as healthy and strong lately, and I think it has to do with what you're eating." He could come to me with the best intentions and still know it's gonna be hard and
Right.
handle it right, but because I have that past, I can't even begin to listen to him, and so the impact of the conversation won't be there. I need to realize what my triggers are, why they're there, so that I can actually lean in and listen and hear things. But I think those are probably the main ones. I mean, we have some cognitive biases, so we should also know as humans that we have confirmation bias, meaning what we think we are as our identity, as our human nature, as, our self-esteem of who we are, we're going to look for things that confirm what we view and not contradict it. So when someone comes to you with a difficult conversation that does contradict it, it might seem surprising because we have biases to avoid doing that ourselves. And there's a few others that I won't get into, but there's that aspect as well, which, by the way, just highlights how fucking confusing humans are. Like, it's hard. No wonder we say it's hard. It is hard.
So complicated all the time, and you
Yeah.
just never know what you're gonna get at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that self awareness, self reflection, active listening to the person, having trust underneath the relationship, asking clarifying questions if you don't understand something, seeking, support to go forward. Those are all things that will help the receiver when you're in it to, I think, move through it. Yeah.
Well, we've got a lot of tips and tricks here, no matter whom you are in the kind of cycle of the difficult conversation. Like, it's really interesting to look at it from the three lenses and
Yeah,
break
I
it
guess I'm
down in that
curious for you. Like, do you have a memory of one specific conversation that you felt was so difficult that you had to prepare for? And did you succeed in it or did you fail, in your opinion? Without going into anything that would obviously
way.
contradict the confidentiality, but
No, and it would be a really similar one that you mentioned in terms of firing, though we don't fire. I mean, it's maybe removing an opportunity from someone because the performance wasn't there. And I was really prepared, and I was actually really nervous going into the conversation. And interestingly enough, I think the conversation went well. It ended very emotionally for the recipient, and I had no doubt that it would. But I do think that I followed the steps in terms of being prepared. So I was prepared in my words, I was prepared in my thought, and I was prepared emotionally for there to be some sort of reaction. I was careful. um, the individual actually, after I stated what the issue was and what was going to happen and what was the outcome of all the activities that they'd taken on that weren't done appropriately or up to a standard, they actually acknowledged themselves right off the bat that they suspected that this would end up happening, and they know that that they weren't performing to the degree that was expected. One thing I will say is although it was clear, I didn't allow enough space at the end for them to be with their thoughts, um, or for me to ask them questions more so about the why, certain things were going on, or if there were
yeah.
other issues. I I moved most of the time to fill the space. which you're actually not supposed to, right?
Yeah,
You're meant to allow those awkward spaces to be there and for you to not fill them and add in your perspective and
yeah,
your, little tidbits. It's for them to come forward and give information as to the why or,
yeah,
what's going on or how they want to improve. So I wouldn't say that my conversation was a fail. And I wouldn't also say that it was a full blown success. It was definitely a learning opportunity for me. Um, yeah. So I think kind of the last step of it in terms of the be curious, I took more time being a speaker than I should.
yeah. And I think that has a lot to do with being nervous. When you're nervous, you naturally speak more, you fill space. And so I think it's a great takeaway, which is actually twofold. One, it's good to be nervous when you're leaning into a difficult conversation. It shows you care. So, like, be okay with it
Yeah.
and actually appreciate that you still do. I remember someone once told me, because I actually had a few difficult conversations. I ended up crying afterwards. Someone told me, "The day you stop crying, I'll be scared because I know that you care so much about the organization, about the people, and that gives me trust and hope." So, like, it's not a bad thing. So I just want to highlight that. But the second thing is just know how we work when we're nervous and worried. We overtalk, we jump in. And so I think it's great, actively listen and give space.
Yeah. That's something I continue to work on and be more mindful of,
Yeah.
ideally in the moment, or at least like really, really quickly afterwards, so that I can prepare myself to adjust my behavior in future situations. But that's
Yeah.
definitely a thing that I'm working on.
Yeah, and I think just to sum it up, like the cheat sheet to difficult conversations is that there's 3 different lenses. There's the organization, there's the person delivering the hard conversation, and there's person receiving it. And you do not have control over all 3. You probably have control over 1, maybe 2 if you're a leader that high up, that you can control the culture as long along with your conversation. But just know that it's hard and it's going to be hard, and there's many things we talked about in this episode that helps enable it to be as successful as it can be. But you're probably going to learn from messing them up because they are hard and they're meant to be. So just keep
Well,
trying.
I think that's the perfect TLDL for this episode. And
Let's go
what do you say?
drink.
Let, let's just do it. We need to get there, I think.
Okay, be right back. And we're back.
And we're back.
Chelsea's hair is up. She's ready for relaxing wine time.
Wine time, a little snack time.
Okay, today we have a Treana. How would you say that? Treana. Treana?
Treana.
Treana, okay, I had it right. It's a Blanc, which I think it's actually a Chard. It tastes like a Chardonnay, so I'm gonna assume it's a Chardonnay. Oh, it's from California. The warm California sun that nurtures and the cooling ocean breeze that balances. That's what it says.
Of
So it's
course.
not Italian. It is a California Chard. What do you think, Chelsea?
Well, I'm not a huge fan,
It's buttery.
but because I just don't like shards anymore. And we've talked about this, so I'm not going to go at it. And
I actually don't mind it. It's definitely like a buttery Chardonnay. Like you either like those or you don't. And so it's probably too overpowering for you.
it just is now. And like I used to love Chardonnays and I just don't. So it's like, I mean, I probably won't finish it. I'm not going to lie. And that's,
That
so
bad. So you'd give it like a 3.
I don't think it's bad,
It's
but
just not your taste buds.
I'd give it a 5.
Okay, well that's pretty damn bad. I'd give it a 5. I honestly would give it, I don't know, like for my taste and everything, I'd give it like a 7. Like I could drink it, a Chardonnay, it's good, but I think it's like 40 bucks a bottle. I wouldn't be running towards the LCBO to buy another one, you
It's just
know?
very pungent.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But if you like Chardonnay, I think it'd be like a 9. I think people who like Chardonnay would really like this.
Yeah. I mean, if it's a good Chardonnay and you like a Chardonnay, then great. This is
Yeah.
the thing.
Yeah. So for those, Trina.
Trina or
Yeah.
Triana. We don't know.
Triana, whatever, however you want to call
We
it.
don't care. We don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Chelsea, you're so lucky you get me here in Ottawa 2 podcasts in a row.
Two
You gotta use my
podcasts.
house, we gotta
Oh,
be together, it's so good.
we had a sleep. We had a We had a sleepover the
I
other
was like, "What are
night.
you trying to say?" You tried to say it, then you pulled back, and then you went back into it again.
I don't know why I had like a little bit of a nervous tick and then I stopped.
You didn't want people to know that you slept over at my house?
No, I don't think I care about that. Something just cracked in my brain.
Okay. Just your end of your limits. You're like, "It's time for wine. We don't need to
Yeah,
think anymore."
I need like a proper dinner now, probably.
Yeah, food in your belly. Yeah. It's nice though, I gotta admit, like, being in front of my painting again, here at home, it's comfy. Come May and June, will be probably, I guess, June will be more here.
We will be, yes.
Yeah.
I've,
Oh, shoot. You know what I just realized? We forgot to take a picture in the last one. We've been trying to get fresh photos every time we podcast, gang, and we suck at it. We're probably the worst.
yeah, we are pretty bad at it, but
I know.
we'll get one. We'll get one.
Yeah, actually, there's gonna be pictures of Katie's birthday, probably not even on this, it'll be a different one, but you're welcome because 'cause they're
Yeah,
good.
they're good. Theme birthdays are always clutch.
What would be your next theme that you would wanna choose?
That's a good question.
I have, like, 3 theme parties I'm doing in Arizona before I come home.
So like last year, I think we did, or the year, like, so we've done some 80s stuff. We did
We've done
Merc
Mermaid.
recently. We just did mobsters and mob wives.
Yeah.
Didn't your mom say we're doing something for the Camelot golf
Well,
tournament?
there's always a theme, I think. Yeah.
She mentioned something before.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
And we did
I'm doing I'm doing a disco theme, a rock star theme, and a masters theme.
three different themes for
Well, 3
different.
different, like, shindigs, yeah.
Oh, that's fun. Masters theme, eh?
Oh, sorry, and Caddyshack.
What does that even mean?
I think it was a movie, it's like a golf. That's for Scott's golf tournament, the wives can go for the party part, and you're supposed to dress up. I don't know, I think, like, Argyle.
You know what? I really like Great Gatsby themed stuff just because like
Yeah?
it's such a great era, and I haven't done anything like that in a long while. I'd probably be into a 70s theme lately.
Oh, 70s would be good. Like, the disco, I feel like I wanna take it 70s. Like, more like flower power.
Okay, there you go. So a little bit
Yeah,
different spin on the 70s then.
yeah.
Um, I don't know what else I would be into right now. Like, does anyone ever choose the Great Depression theme?
No,
Like
I don't think so. I feel
people
like
who are
that's not a theme. What do
not
you show up with, like, mud on your face? And potatoes? Like,
just
I don't know
running
what.
trails, trying to find some work, as an oil coal person or whatever, a coal miner.
No, I don't
Like,
think
I
that's
guess
a
we
theme.
don't look at those really fun, those like brutal errors as fun, exciting themes for
No.
things, right?
I think a fun theme is always where you, like, color block people. Like, someone was telling me, who was it? Oh, it was Lee. She was saying that she went to this party and each family had to pick a color and then make an app and a cocktail that were the same color. So her family was, I think it was blue, and so they had to have a cocktail and, like, a food choice, but there was, like, green, pink, red.
I've seen that where people like come in similarly with each with their own tray and it's a
Yeah.
different color of the rainbow. And it's like, it's really cool because you can use natural type of foods and then you have like synthetic things with like
Yeah.
packaging and whatever. And then having a matching drink is kind of fun.
It's funny because in that case, you want brown, even though it's, like, the worst color to be in. It's the easiest for, like, food and shit, like beige brown, but then you get, like, purple, and you're like, "What food and drink do you make that's purple?"
You got to get really creative. I mean, like you have like purple grapes or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know. I was just thinking orange as the top of my head, and I was like, oh, I'll bring a bag of Cheetos, like
Oh, that would be my color.
like perfect.
Too bad I can't
Color.
rock orange.
But then,
Just
yeah, where do you go? Pink actually wouldn't be that bad either. So you could do cupcakes with like a purple icing,
yeah. I
and
feel
then
like
different
the random
candy.
colors will all be just like sugar.
Oh, you could do Empress, eh, Katie? You could do Empress
Oh,
with
that's Katie's fave,
like a
yeah.
nice cocktail or something. She would like that.
Yep, you're right.
So yeah, there's
Anyways, we're
options.
digressing on food
Oh
choices.
yeah.
If anyone has one of these parties, let us know how it goes.
We should do one of these parties. That's a brilliant theme. I like that.
Okay, well, you host.
Everyone bring a tray. Well, if you come to
Yeah,
town.
maybe we do that for my birthday, but, like, swimwear, pick a color, and bring an app that matches. Then, 2 birds, 1 stone. I can just order pizza later, but people bring food.
So you have to have your swimwear matching your
Yeah,
color, and you have to have a food that
and a
matches.
drink. But the only problem with that is, like, that's so much mixing for drinking.
Yeah, and also, like, how what type of food are you gonna get with, like we said, the color purple, or
Yeah. I don't know, we'll think on it, guys. We're really getting into the
a really
minutia of
cool
our
idea, though. Like, we are showing our age at this point going, "Yeah, it's a bit too much mixing for
I
drinks,
know
so we
let's
just
be
wanna
honest,
stick
though.
to
When was
basic."
the last time
Oh,
you, like, mixed alcohols, and how did you feel?
yeah, I can't even drink a couple of glasses of wine without regretting it now,
I
waking
know.
up in a fucking cold sweat.
Why are all such yummy vices so bad for us?
That's frustrating.
I
Whoever
know.
whoever decided that is just straight up mean.
I know, I feel like there's so many scientists
It
out there,
keeps me.
create something that tastes like wine that gives you that little buzz, but doesn't give you a hangover.
Is it like the a non-alcoholic wine, though?
No, but then you don't get a buzz.
Oh, yeah, we still want the
I
buzz.
like the buzz. I
We're
love, like, a
searching for the
tipsy.
dopamine rush, guys, just in
Yeah.
case you were asking.
Yeah.
We want the quick high. We don't want anything else.
Exactly. Exactly. And on that note, dopamine you.
And dopamine to you as well.
Cheers. Love ya.